So today I'm going to talk about our project with St. Giles and kind of how it came about, what its goals were, and how we as a team worked alongside them in the University of Glasgow to make it a reality. I'll also talk a bit about the funding journey as well as the the long impact trail on it. Right, so this is me in a single screen. It's almost depressing to do this. So I'm Matthew Leeper. If my accent didn't give me away, I'm originally from a place called Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. This kind of center box here. It's the only photogenic angle that exists of the city. So I arrived in Scotland around 11 years ago to further my education at the University of Glasgow. I did a master's in Latin linguistics, and then I guess I like a bit of academic torture because I stayed on for a PhD in 12th century diplomatic history. After I finished my PhD, it was peak COVID. Education accessibility was something that was very important to me, and so I started Education Evolved, originally doing virtual study abroad programs for U.S. institutions because they could not travel. We took the cost of that from $20,000 a student for 3 weeks down to $300 per student. At the end of COVID, all of my university partners dropped me because we were not generating enough profit for them. So we had to change what we did. I also am a non-executive director of My Academic Family, which is a nonprofit that focuses on first-generation care experienced and displaced students to help them increase their chances of succeeding through higher education. And I'm also a Innovation Collective member at Alzheimer's Society to help people living with dementia. But we're here today to talk about St. Giles Cathedral and how we developed a project alongside them to play through 900 years of history, essentially, in 10 minutes. This was a project combined between ourselves, Education Evolved, the University of Glasgow Games and Gaming Lab were a key research aspect of this. And then we also had Interface as partial funding. And then, of course, St. Giles Cathedral themselves, who spent quite a bit of time on this project and really helped bring it to life. The project name originally was Project Heritage. The AI was so we could get funding. We did not use AI in it, but we explored how AI could be used to impact heritage museums along with academic research in these fields. So this project really started about three and a half years ago. St. Giles came to the University of Glasgow initially, who brought us in. And the idea was, could we explain how to build a church or a cathedral in the Middle Ages? Basically, they brought one of those books that I'm sure we've all seen where you open it up and it's got the bisected building and it shows each part of it and all the construction workers and the cranes. And they said, we want this, but we want it digital. And maybe being a bit more ambitious, I said, well, why are we using a generic church? Let's use the cathedral itself. And they really liked that idea, but really what they were looking for was they had an information and research gap. There was a lot of research they had collected over the years, but wasn't being articulated to their visitors. They wanted to provide a standard set of guidance for their visitors because it's still a functioning kirk. They couldn't just put a bunch of information on the walls. They had plenty of new material. A lot of their little pamphlet that they were still handing out was originally created in 1991 with very little updates since. And they just wanted to have a new way to engage with visitors. It was really the focus. They wanted to give a reason to stop other than just a quick walk through across the ambulatory. So initially, the pilot research happened in 2 workshops and a lot of effort in between. In workshop 1, the Cathedral and the University of Glasgow and ourselves set out the project parameters. What was the goals? We really discussed the historical significance of cathedrals in general, but also of St. Giles. And this was open to the public, so this was a public engagement workshop. We talked about the possibilities of generative AI in the heritage sector. It was more of we tried to prompt image generation to do this, and look how horrible it did. Some of it I actually did all right. It recreated St. Giles made of wood really well. But when we asked it to generate salmon jumping in the river, it gave us cooked salmon jumping out of the water, which wasn't so great. And then we also kind of set out like initial game details. What would the public actually want to see if they're going to walk in and play a game or play a digital experience in the cathedral? What could that look like? So we kind of went with a light version of co-design or co-creation between the heritage sector, St. Giles, and the public. In workshop 2, we looked at examples of existing digital representations of cathedrals, everything from very serious representations and digital exhibits that already existed around the world. But we also looked at the kind of the fanciful, like, in traditional video games where cathedral architecture certainly plays a role. Everything from Assassin's Creed games to Bloodborne to a very wide range of video games to kind of take inspiration. We also looked at analog games. If you've read the Ken Follett book, Pillars of the Earth, they have a board game for that. So we looked at how they represented cathedrals in board games. And then we had a breakout group discussion that balanced between realistic and accurate focuses. Right? How real, how true to life did this digital experience need to be? And the answer was very. So the historic research includes archival material, paintings, descriptions of the cathedral, financial records, secondary hagiographical sources and existing cathedrals as they stand today before Burns' renovation on St. Giles. We looked at medieval economics and church history, as well as old editions of guidebooks. So while their current one was kind of 1991, they had some from the 70s and 60s that we could still refer to. We also, the group at the university also did architectural research. So Rice's architectural primer, artistic renderings, lithographs, church records, and restoration and reconstruction bills and documents as well. And this is not St. Giles itself, but this is, oh, no, sorry, yeah, that is. So that was the floor plan. This actually ended up being a problem for us later on, but I'll explain that in a moment. So the research really focused on medieval technology revolution, so we could start to explain to visitors why new parts of the building were added at later dates, to explain what technological advancements had occurred to allow that to happen. The economic shifts around Western Europe, why suddenly did Edinburgh have more money to put into the cathedral, and what the construction impact of that looked like. Why there was any kind of structural shifts, which there are several across St. Giles Cathedral. The explosive growth of church money, and the religious and social evolutions of the late Middle Ages and the early modern period, particularly around the Burns renovation, because that completely changed what the cathedral looked like. And so the research also had to inform the game. And the game, the experience is basically a kind of like a quiz where you can read a short description and then answer a question, and then you watch that part of the cathedral be built, and the questions and information is about that era of the cathedral's history. And we go through basically from the 1200s to the 21st century, looking at all of the stages, kind of every 100 years. We had to do a lot of research. The academic team had to do a lot of research to build those questions, build that information. Initially, they came to us with a 20,000 word script, and they're like, "This is it." And we said, "It is, but it's not, because that's way too long. No one's going to stand there for 45 minutes. Can we pare this down?" We also had to handle the politics of collaboration. When you have 3 entities all kind of working on different parts, there's a lot of communication that has to happen, which made the workshops really valuable. Developing the way that people would engage with the game itself took a lot of trial and error. We had to do several days in the cathedral watching people play it to see how they were engaging, to better understand how we could correct it if there was problems. And also anticipating visitor questions. So when we write a draft around 500 words of information, what potential questions could a visitor might have around that, and how to increase the availability of that information through a kind of a follow-on reading where you don't have to read it, but you can if you're interested. And there was also the challenge of barriers of demographics. St. Giles Cathedral is one of the more popular tourist sites in Scotland, and so you have a lot of people who come and engage that are maybe English as second language or maybe no English at all, and so coping with that as well. And in fact, the first email complaint we got about the experience about 5 days after we released it was that it was not English enough. So that was fun. So we were able to provide additional resources. The number of visitors that are engaging and have visited the site has increased. We also made it where we could do future developments. So while right now it's confined into a 10, 12-minute experience, we made it where it could be built on if funding allowed. We also built it where the game infrastructure could be reused. Right now it's just the exterior of the cathedral, but there's significant interest by the board to eventually do the interior. Of course, that comes with substantial fund difficulties, which is where that delay has happened. And then, of course, balancing a traditional heritage narrative with 21st century technology. So to begin with the development side, we started with basically grabbing satellite data because we wanted this, we knew from the feedback in the workshops this needed to be as accurate as possible. So what we did was we started with satellite data to collect the landscape. And we used a combination of created and purchased assets. So the cathedral and kirk at all stages were built by hand. And this is where the floor plans came in useful, but also difficult. Because while we knew when, in what centuries floor plans were, where pieces were added to the cathedral, they don't tell you where windows were. So when our 3D artist started rebuilding the cathedral, he was like, right, this can't be right. This is really, really dark. There must have been a window here, which was an interesting exercise for the cathedral itself. Well, we worked with the graphic designer at the cathedral as well to create a bespoke user interface. And we reintegrated all the research data and questions into the game to create two timelines, a narrative timeline, but also a physical timeline of the cathedral. So here we can see the satellite data. It is the modern city and it's flat, but you can see how the terrain is mapped. And then we prototyped the city. We recreated the buildings over that landscape. And we had some difficulties. It had to be accessible. Accessible is our focus. We knew we were going to have an in-cathedral experience, but they also wanted it online. So the game works entirely on their website as well. No downloads, no cookie requirements. So people all over the world can go and engage with this experience online as well as in the cathedral. So it became a bit of a marketing tool as well for them that they can kind of champion and roll out. We also embedded analytics in the in-person one and the online one. So we can give them basically real-time updates about how many people are playing, how long they're playing. So the Roman kirk we built by hand. Obviously, there's no images or anything that exists today of that, so we had to use Dalmany kirk to basically help us understand what it looked like. And then each stage of the cathedral was basically built by hand and through adding blocks and then eventually retexturing and recreating them. So I'm going to skip these two videos. I'll distribute the slides after so you can watch. So the metrics since launch, on average, the in-person experience has 1.2 thousand people play it every month. The average session length is 10 minutes. So this sits about 30 meters past the front door in the cathedral. So it's just kind of you walk in and it's there on the left-hand side. So we can get people to stand there for 10 minutes. And usually it's not just one person playing, it's their entire group. But we also have witnessed where multiple groups will stand there and all start to engage, which is actually a really fascinating thing to witness because you're watching people from different countries, different backgrounds, all working together to answer these questions to see the cathedral be built. Between the 1,200 people plus the 10-minute play sessions, basically the experiences between each play session is less than 8 seconds throughout the entire day. So it's pretty much always in constant use. The one thing that they have not built a tracking for, but their director of culture and heritage have told us is donations are up. They put a donation box next to the exhibit, next to the experience. And it's one of the more popular ones, but unfortunately, we've been working with them to try to build a way to track that a bit more rigorously. But they said that this year since it's been installed, they have had record-breaking donation months as well. Right, and then while we launched it, at the launch, we said we were watching people engage with it and it was going really well. And they said, yeah, but can we have a tour guide mode? So immediately we built them a tour guide mode as well. So that way their volunteers can use the iPads and the Android tablets in the cathedral. They don't have to answer the quiz. They just hit a kind of a button and it allows them to immediately show any version and any period of time what the cathedral looked like. I know we don't have time for questions, but please come try it out. We've got it on our laptop back here in the back. I'm happy to have a chat around any questions you have on the project. Thank you so much.